of a single beeswax candle within the stone walls of a medieval scriptorium. A Benedictine monk bent over a sheet of vellum, his quill moving with practiced precision across the surface. For 8 hours, he had worked on a single illuminated letter, a capital B that would begin the Book of Psalms. His concentration had not wavered. No notification had interrupted his thoughts. No ping had demanded his attention. No algorithmic feed had tempted him away from his sacred task. When he finally set down his quill, as the evening bells called him to vespers, he had achieved something that modern humans, despite all our technological advantages, find nearly impossible. A full day of unbroken, deeply focused work, while we in the 21st century struggle with attention spans measured in seconds, with constant digital interruptions, and with the nagging inability to concentrate on single tasks for extended periods. The craftsmen, scribes, and artisans of medieval Europe regularly achieved states of focus that modern cognitive scientists would recognize as extraordinary. The notion that people from an era often characterized by limited education and technological simplicity might have possessed superior attentional capabilities may seem counterintuitive. Yet the evidence suggests that the environmental conditions, cultural practices, and lifestyle factors of medieval Europe created an ecosystem of concentration that our hyperconnected world has almost entirely destroyed. From the scriptoria of monasteries to the workshops of master craftsmen, from the ateliers of manuscript illuminators to the forges of blacksmiths, medieval workers operated within conditions that modern attention researchers now desperately recommend to their distraction-plagued patients. Archaeological findings from workshops across Europe, combined with detailed guild records, monastic rules, and the physical evidence of the extraordinary objects they produced, reveal a culture whose relationship with focused attention was profoundly different from, and arguably superior to, our own. The works they left behind speak to this exceptional focus. The Book of Kells, with its impossibly intricate interlacing patterns, required thousands of hours of concentrated attention. The great cathedrals, with their precisely carved stonework and mathematically sophisticated flying buttresses, demanded decades of sustained collective focus. The illuminated manuscripts, the forged swords, the carved wooden altarpieces, the woven tapestries, each represents not just skill, but an ability to sustain attention that seems almost superhuman by contemporary standards. This exploration examines the multifaceted reasons why medieval craftsmen may have achieved focus superior to anything possible in our modern world. We will examine how their work environments eliminated distraction, how their daily rhythms aligned with natural cognitive cycles, how their apprenticeship systems built attentional capacity over decades, and how their cultural and spiritual frameworks created psychological conditions conducive to deep concentration. By understanding the focus practices of medieval craftsmen, we gain not only historical insight, but potentially valuable lessons for reclaiming attention in a world designed to fragment it. As we journey through the working practices of the medieval era, we will meet characters like Brother Aldrich, the illuminator whose decades of manuscript work in a Northumbrian monastery reveal much about monastic concentration practices, and Master Heinrich, the Nuremberg goldsmith whose workshop exemplifies the focus-supporting environment of guild craftsmanship. Through these historically grounded examples, we can glimpse the lived experience of concentration during this remarkable period of human creativity. The evidence suggests a provocative conclusion. Despite their lack of scientific understanding of attention and cognition, the craftsmen of medieval Europe may have been among the most focused humans in history, a quality that perhaps explains their remarkable achievements in art, architecture, and craftsmanship. As we shall see, when it comes to concentration, we modern humans have much to learn from our medieval ancestors. The modern conception of productivity, maximizing output per unit of time, multitasking across simultaneous demands, responding immediately to every request, would have been incomprehensible to medieval craftsmen. Their relationship with work operated according to fundamentally different principles, principles that modern cognitive science increasingly recognizes as optimal for deep, focused attention. Archaeological evidence from medieval workshops, combined with guild records and monastic schedules, reveals a relationship with time radically different from our own. Time in the medieval world was not measured in minutes and seconds, but in the natural rhythms of days, seasons, and liturgical cycles. The mechanical clock, though invented in the 13th century, did not regulate daily life for most people until centuries later. This absence of precise timekeeping had profound implications for focused work. Modern research on attention has identified time pressure as one of the most significant impediments to deep concentration. The constant awareness of passing minutes, the pressure of approaching deadlines measured in hours, and the fragmenting of time into billable increments all work against the kind of sustained attention that produces masterwork. Medieval craftsmen worked instead within what we might call task time, the natural duration required to complete a piece of work to the required standard. A manuscript page took as long as it took. A sword was forged when it was ready. This absence of artificial time pressure created psychological conditions where attention could settle deeply into work without the cognitive load of constant temporal monitoring. Guild records from cities like Florence, Bruges, and Cologne reveal work schedules that seem almost leisurely by modern standards. Master craftsmen typically worked 6 days per week, but their days included multiple breaks, communal meals, and prayer times that fragmented work in ways that aligned with natural cognitive rhythms rather than artificial productivity demands. The average medieval craftsman likely worked fewer total hours than many modern professionals, yet produced work of extraordinary quality that required exceptional concentration. Perhaps no institution in medieval Europe was more deliberately designed to support sustained concentration than the Benedictine monastery. The Rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, and governing monastic life throughout the medieval period, created what might be understood as the first systematic approach to attentional optimization. Archaeological excavations of medieval monasteries across Europe reveal physical environments carefully designed to minimize distraction. The scriptoria, where monks copied and illuminated manuscripts, were typically located in the quietest parts of the monastery, often on upper floors away from the noise of kitchens and workshops. Windows were positioned to provide consistent natural light without direct glare, and the rooms were oriented to minimize temperature fluctuations that might distract from work. At the monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy, archaeologists have uncovered the remains of a scriptorium that included individual carrels, small enclosed workspaces that limited the visual field and created environments of enforced focus. Similar features have been found at Cluny, St. Gall, and and numerous other monasteries, suggesting a widespread understanding that the physical environment profoundly affected the ability to concentrate. The monastic schedule itself represented a sophisticated approach to attention management. The divine office, the cycle of 8 daily prayers, created a rhythm that broke the day into focused work periods of approximately 2 to 3 hours, interspersed with communal activities that allowed cognitive recovery. Modern attention research has identified similar interval lengths as optimal for sustained focus, suggesting that the Benedictine schedule, developed through centuries of practical experience, had discovered principles that contemporary science is only now validating. Consider Brother Aldrich, an illuminator at Lindisfarne Priory in 8th century Northumbria. His day began with matins in the dark hours before dawn, followed by lauds at first light. After a simple breakfast, he would enter the scriptorium for his morning work session, lasting until the terce prayers mid-morning. Another focused session followed until the sext prayers at midday and the main meal. The afternoon brought another work session until none, then vespers at sunset and compline before sleep. This rhythm, approximately 3 hours of focused work, then a transition to a different activity, then another focused period, aligns precisely with what modern chronobiological research has identified as the natural ultradian rhythm of human attention. The monks of Lindisfarne, like their brothers across medieval Europe, had stumbled upon an optimal schedule for sustained concentration through centuries of lived experience. Beyond the monasteries, secular workshops developed their own systems for supporting focused craftsmanship. Guild regulations from major medieval cities reveal careful attention to the conditions of work, including specifications for workspace design, lighting requirements, and the limitation of interruptions during critical work phases. In the goldsmiths' workshops of Nuremberg, guild records specify that masters working on particularly delicate commissions were not to be interrupted for any but the most urgent reasons. Similar provisions appear in the regulations of illuminators' guilds in Paris, armorers' guilds in Milan, and glassmakers' guilds in Venice. These rules recognized what modern attention research confirms: that interruptions impose a significant switching cost on cognitive performance, and that protecting focused time is essential for high-quality work. Our Archaeological evidence from medieval workshops reveals physical layouts designed to support concentration. Workbenches were typically positioned to take advantage of natural light, with the craftsman's back to the room's entrance to minimize visual distraction. Tools were arranged in consistent, accessible patterns that minimized the need for disruptive searching. The workshops themselves were often located in quieter areas of towns, away from the bustle of markets and thoroughfares. Master Heinrich's goldsmith workshop in late medieval Nuremberg exemplified these principles. Archaeological evidence from similar workshops suggests a space perhaps 4 meters by 6, with the master's workbench positioned near the window for optimal light. His most frequently used tools, gravers, burnishers, files of various grades, would have been arranged within arm's reach in a consistent pattern learned over decades of practice. His apprentices would work at their own benches, but positioned so their activities were visible without requiring the master to turn from his own work. When Heinrich settled into the work of chasing a design into a silver chalice, he entered an environment stripped of unnecessary stimulation. The familiar arrangement of his tools eliminated the cognitive load of searching. The consistent lighting reduced eye strain and eliminated the distraction of changing conditions. The guild regulations protecting his work time meant he could enter states of deep absorption with confidence that he would not be arbitrarily interrupted. The physical environments in which medieval craftsmen worked were not accidentally conducive to focus. They were shaped by centuries of accumulated wisdom about what conditions supported sustained, high-quality work. From the stone cells of anchorites to the timber-framed workshops of urban craftsmen, medieval workspaces embodied principles that modern architects and workplace designers are only now rediscovering. Archaeological evidence from medieval workspaces reveals a consistent approach to visual simplicity that stands in stark contrast to our cluttered modern environments. Monastic cells and scriptoria typically featured plain walls, minimal furnishing, and carefully controlled lines of sight. Guild workshops, while more varied, still emphasized visual clarity within the immediate work area. Modern research on attention has confirmed the wisdom of this approach. Studies published in the Journal of Consumer Research have demonstrated that visual clutter significantly impairs cognitive function, reducing working memory capacity and increasing the effort required to maintain focus. The medieval instinct to create visually simplified work environments anticipated these findings by centuries. The individual carols found in many monastic scriptoria represent perhaps the most sophisticated approach to visual isolation. These wooden enclosures, typically open on one side for light, but otherwise screening the worker from visual distraction, created microenvironments of enforced focus. Reconstructions based on archaeological evidence and manuscript illustrations suggest these carols were designed to fill the peripheral vision with neutral surfaces, eliminating the visual stimulation that can unconsciously draw attention away from the work at hand. At the Cistercian monastery of Fontenay in Burgundy, the remains of the scriptorium show a row of arched windows along one wall, with positions for individual workstations between the windows. Each workspace would have received direct light for the work surface, while the worker faced a plain stone wall, minimizing visual distraction while maximizing illumination of the manuscript page. Medieval attitudes toward sound in work environments reflected a sophisticated understanding of its effects on concentration. The rule of Saint Benedict emphasized silence as a fundamental monastic value, not merely for spiritual reasons, but with explicit recognition that quiet supported the work of reading and writing. Archaeological evidence from monasteries reveals acoustic design principles that minimized sound transmission. Scriptoria were often located away from noisy areas like kitchens, forges, and animal quarters. Thick stone walls provided substantial sound insulation. In some monasteries, corridors near the scriptorium featured angled walls or fabric hangings that would have reduced sound reflection. Guild regulations similarly protected acoustic environments. Records from various medieval cities specify that noisy trades such as blacksmithing, coopering, and metalworking were to be located in specific quarters, away from trades requiring concentration. Some guild rules explicitly prohibited loud talking or singing during delicate work phases. Modern research has confirmed the profound impact of acoustic environment on attention. Studies published in Applied Cognitive Psychology have shown that even low-level background noise can impair complex cognitive tasks, while intermittent noise, such as conversation, is particularly disruptive to concentration. The medieval emphasis on acoustic control in workspaces reflected an intuitive understanding of principles that contemporary research has validated. Consider the experience of Sister Margaret, an embroiderer working in a convent in the Rhineland during the 14th century. Her workshop, evidence from similar convents suggests, would have been located in a wing away from the kitchen and laundry. The thick walls of her workroom would have muffled sounds from outside. The convent's emphasis on silence meant that even when other sisters were present, conversation was minimal and subdued. The loudest regular sound would have been the bells calling the community to prayer, a sound that, rather than interrupting her concentration, served to structure her day into focused work periods. Medieval craftsmen understood that physical discomfort impaired the ability to concentrate on demanding work. Guild regulations and monastic rules reveal careful attention to thermal comfort, even within the constraints of pre-modern heating technology. Archaeological evidence from workshops and scriptoria shows sophisticated approaches to temperature management. Workshops were often oriented to take advantage of solar heating, with the primary work areas facing south in the northern hemisphere to capture winter sun. The thick stone walls of monasteries provided thermal mass that moderated temperature fluctuations. Small windows, while limiting light, also reduced heat loss and drafts. In scriptoria, where cold fingers could not hold a quill steadily, special provisions were made for heating. Many monasteries maintained fires or braziers in or near the scriptorium during winter months. Some featured enclosed heated rooms called calefactories, where monks could warm themselves before returning to work. At Durham Cathedral Priory, archaeological evidence shows a heated chamber directly adjacent to the scriptorium, allowing monks to restore warmth to their hands without leaving the work area. Modern research on thermal comfort and cognitive performance has found that temperature significantly affects the ability to concentrate, with both cold and heat impairing cognitive function. The medieval attention to thermal management in workspaces, though limited by available technology, reflected awareness of this relationship. Perhaps no aspect of medieval workspace design received more attention than lighting. Before electric lights, the quality and consistency of illumination was perhaps the most significant factor determining what work was possible and for how long. Medieval craftsmen developed sophisticated approaches to maximizing usable daylight while minimizing the visual fatigue and distraction that could accompany poor lighting. Archaeological evidence from scriptoria reveals careful window placement and sizing designed to provide consistent, glare-free illumination of work surfaces. Windows were typically positioned high in walls, providing indirect light rather than direct sun that would cause shadows and glare. In many monasteries, windows were splayed, angled outward through the thickness of the wall to maximize light penetration while maintaining the acoustic and thermal insulation of thick walls. The orientation of workspaces relative to natural light sources reflected centuries of accumulated knowledge. Guild records from various cities specify preferred orientations for different types of work, with fine work requiring consistent north light, which provides even illumination without direct sun, and heavier work acceptable in spaces with more variable lighting. In the great Florentine workshops of the Renaissance, which continued medieval craft traditions, masters positioned their work to receive north light through carefully sized windows. The sculptor Donatello's workshop, based on contemporary descriptions and archaeological evidence from similar spaces, featured high windows on the north side that provided even, shadow-minimizing light for the delicate work of marble carving. Modern chronobiology has identified natural rhythms in human attention and cognitive performance. Cycles of approximately 90 to 120 minutes during which focus naturally waxes and wanes. These ultradian rhythms, as they are called, suggest that the optimal approach to focused work involves periods of concentrated effort alternating with recovery periods. The medieval workday, shaped by liturgical rhythms and the natural constraints of pre-industrial life, aligned remarkably well with these biological patterns. The Benedictine Horarium, the daily schedule of prayers and activities, created a structure that divided the day into focused work periods of approximately 2 to 3 hours, separated by the communal activities of the divine office. This rhythm, developed over centuries for spiritual purposes, inadvertently created near-optimal conditions for sustained cognitive performance. The 8 canonical hours of prayer, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline, punctuated the monastic day at intervals that prevented the cognitive fatigue associated with continuous work, while allowing enough time in each work period for deep concentration to develop. Modern attention research has found that attempting to maintain focus for more than approximately 2 hours without a break leads to declining performance and increasing mental fatigue. The monastic schedule, with its regular interruptions for prayer, study, and communal meals, prevented this fatigue, while the consistent structure reduced the cognitive load of deciding when to work and when to rest. Consider the daily experience of Brother Thomas, a scribe at Canterbury Cathedral Priory in the 13th century. His day, as recorded in surviving customaries, books describing monastic routine, would have followed a pattern something like this. He rose for matins around 2:00 a.m., spending approximately an hour in prayer and chanting before returning to his cell for additional sleep or private reading. Lauds at dawn began the active day, followed by prime, and then a period for private work, reading, meditation, or beginning the day's copying work in the scriptorium. After approximately 2 hours, Terse called him to prayer, providing a natural break before the main morning work session. The morning work period, lasting until sext at midday, represented the longest continuous stretch of work. Even this period of approximately 3 hours included informal breaks for rest and refreshment. The midday meal and nun prayers in the early afternoon provided substantial recovery time before the afternoon work session, which ended with vespers at sunset. The evening hours between vespers and compline were for lighter activities, collatio or communal reading, light work, or recreation. This structure, repeated daily for decades, created a rhythm that supported sustained attention over periods far longer than most modern workers can achieve. The regular interruptions prevented the fatigue that comes from overextending focused attention, while the consistency of the schedule eliminated the cognitive load of constantly deciding what to do next. Medieval craftsmen also adapted their work patterns to the seasonal variations in daylight that shaped pre-industrial life. Guild records and monastic customaries reveal substantial seasonal differences in work schedules, with longer work periods during the extended daylight of summer and shorter periods during winter's limited light. Far from being a limitation, this seasonal variation may have supported better cognitive function. Modern research has found that human circadian rhythms shift seasonally, with natural tendencies toward more sleep and lower activity during winter months. The medieval adaptation of work patterns to seasonal light cycles aligned with these biological tendencies rather than fighting against them, as our year-round identical schedules do. Archaeological evidence from workshops shows adaptations for seasonal work. Winter workspaces were often smaller and more easily heated, with work confined to areas near windows. Summer workshops might expand into outdoor spaces or rooms that would be too cold for winter use. This physical movement between spaces, necessitated by seasonal changes, would have provided variety and natural breaks from any single work environment. Beyond the daily cycle, medieval craftsmen operated within a weekly rhythm that included regular rest. Sunday was universally a day of rest from manual labor, and many guilds observed Saturday afternoons as half-holidays. Major feast days, dozens per year in the medieval calendar, provided additional breaks from concentrated work. This rhythm of regular rest days, far more generous than contemporary vacation policies, provided necessary recovery from the demands of sustained concentration. Modern research has found that cognitive performance degrades with continuous work, even when daily rest periods are maintained. The medieval pattern of regular weekly and seasonal rest periods would have supported sustained high performance over careers that often spanned decades. The medieval guild system, with its structured progression from apprentice to journeyman to master, created a systematic approach to developing attentional capacity over time. Unlike modern education, which often emphasizes rapid acquisition of information, the medieval apprenticeship system developed skills, including the skill of sustained attention, gradually over periods of 7 years or more. Guild regulations across medieval Europe specified apprenticeship periods, typically lasting 7 years, during which the apprentice gradually progressed from simple tasks requiring limited attention to complex work demanding sustained concentration. This progression, shaped by centuries of experience in skill transmission, inadvertently created an effective method for developing attentional capacity. Modern research on attention has found that the ability to focus is itself a skill that can be developed through practice. Just as muscles grow stronger with progressive resistance, the neural networks supporting sustained attention can be strengthened through gradually increasing demands. The medieval apprenticeship system created precisely this kind of progressive training. A young person entering the goldsmith's trade at age 12 or 13 would begin with simple tasks: sweeping the workshop, maintaining the fire, running errands. These tasks, while menial, required the apprentice to sustain attention to his duties throughout the workday, building basic attentional capacity. Gradually, he would be introduced to the simpler aspects of the craft: filing, polishing, basic forming, tasks requiring greater focus, but still within reach of his developing abilities. Over years, the complexity and attentional demands of assigned tasks would increase. By the third or fourth year, the apprentice might be trusted with elements of actual commissions, working under close supervision on portions of pieces that would be completed by more senior craftsmen. The final years of apprenticeship brought work approaching master quality, preparing the young craftsman for the journeyman years, when he would work independently in various workshops before establishing himself as a master. This progression, stretched over nearly a decade, built attentional capacity gradually and systematically. By the time a craftsman reached master status, typically in his mid-20s, he possessed an ability to sustain focus that had been developed over years of progressive training. The tradition of the masterpiece, a work of exceptional quality created to demonstrate mastery of the craft, represented the culmination of this attentional training. To achieve master status, a journeyman had to create a work that met the exacting standards of the guild masters, demonstrating not just technical skill, but the sustained concentration necessary to complete a complex work without errors. Guild records describe masterpiece requirements in various trades. A goldsmith might be required to create a complex piece, a chalice, a reliquary, an intricate pendant, demonstrating mastery of all the guild's techniques. A joiner might have to construct a cabinet or chest, showing mastery of every type of joint and finish. A tailor might have to create multiple garments, meeting exacting standards. These masterworks typically required weeks or months of concentrated effort. A single significant error could mean starting over. The ability to sustain attention over this extended period, maintaining the highest standards throughout, was as much what the masterpiece tested as technical skill. In this way, the masterpiece served as a final examination, not just of craft knowledge, but of the attentional capacity developed over years of apprenticeship. The apprenticeship system transmitted not just technical knowledge, but what we might now call tacit knowledge, understanding that cannot be easily articulated, but is acquired through observation and practice. This included knowledge of how to focus, how to manage attention over long work periods, and how to recover from the mental fatigue of demanding work. Modern research on expertise has emphasized the importance of tacit knowledge in skilled performance. Experts often cannot fully articulate how they do what they do. Their knowledge is embedded in practiced patterns of perception and action. The medieval apprenticeship system, with its emphasis on learning through doing under expert supervision, was ideally suited to transmitting this tacit knowledge, including the tacit knowledge of how to maintain focus over extended periods. An apprentice observing his master at work would see not just technical processes, but attention management strategies, how the master paused at certain points, how he managed fatigue, how he maintained concentration during critical phases. This observed behavior, absorbed over years of close proximity, shaped the apprentice's own approach to focused work without explicit instruction. Consider young Hans, an apprentice in Master Heinrich's goldsmith workshop. For 7 years, he would watch the master at work, observing not just how to chase a design or set a stone, but how to settle into focused attention, how to pace a demanding piece, how to manage the frustration of difficult work without losing concentration. These lessons, never explicitly taught, would be absorbed through years of proximity to a master craftsman, becoming part of Hans's own approach to focused work when he eventually established his own workshop. Medieval craftsmen maintained physical activity patterns that, like those of the Vikings, created conditions conducive to focused mental work. The physically demanding nature of most medieval occupations, combined with the absence of motorized transportation, ensured high levels of daily movement that modern research has linked to improved cognitive function and attentional capacity. Life in the medieval world required substantial daily physical effort. There were no motorized vehicles, no electrical appliances, no power tools. Every task required human or animal muscle power. This constant physical engagement had significant cognitive benefits that modern research is only now beginning to fully appreciate. Archaeological analysis of medieval skeletal remains reveals the physical demands of medieval life. Bones show distinctive muscle attachment patterns, indicating regular heavy use. Joint where patterns suggest activities performed repeatedly over decades. These physical remains confirm that medieval bodies were constantly active in ways our sedentary modern bodies rarely experience. This physical activity had direct benefits for cognitive function and attention. Modern research has established clear links between physical activity and cognitive performance, with regular exercise improving attention, working memory, and cognitive flexibility. The unavoidable physical activity of medieval life would have provided these cognitive benefits as a constant background to focused work. Even craftsmen engaged in relatively sedentary work maintained higher activity levels than most modern professionals. A medieval scribe spent hours at his desk, but he also walked to and from the scriptorium, climbed stairs, participated in manual tasks around the monastery, and walked significant distances for any travel outside the immediate area. His total daily movement far exceeded that of a modern office worker, and this movement supported the cognitive function that enabled his focused copying work. Many medieval crafts involved significant physical components that integrated body and mind in ways that modern cognitive science recognizes as beneficial for focused attention. Rather than the purely mental work that characterizes many modern occupations, medieval crafts engaged the body as well as the mind, creating states of absorption that supported sustained concentration. The blacksmith shaping iron at his forge engaged in a dance of perception, judgment, and physical action that required and developed extraordinary focus. The stone carver, reading the grain of his material as he coaxed forms from rock, combined physical skill with aesthetic judgment in a unity that absorbed the whole person. Even the scribe, whose work seems most purely mental, engaged in a skilled physical activity. The control of the quill, the maintenance of posture, the physical rhythm of the copying work. Modern research on embodied cognition has emphasized that thinking is not purely mental, but involves the body in fundamental ways. Physical engagement with materials, the skilled manipulation of tools, the sensory feedback of craft work. All of these contribute to cognitive states of focused absorption. Medieval crafts, with their integration of physical and mental work, created conditions for precisely these states. The flow states that psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi has identified as the peak of human experience, states of complete absorption in which time seems to stop and the self seems to disappear into the activity, are most readily achieved in activities combining skill with challenge, typically activities with strong physical components. Medieval crafts requiring years of training and engaging both body and mind were ideally suited to inducing these states of focused absorption. Many medieval crafts involved rhythmic physical activities that supported sustained focus. The blacksmith's hammering, the weaver's shuttle, the miller's grinding, the scribe's pen strokes, all established physical rhythms that could induce meditative states of concentrated attention. Modern research has found that rhythmic activities can facilitate focused states by reducing the cognitive demands of maintaining attention. When the body is engaged in a familiar rhythm, less mental effort is required to sustain the activity, freeing cognitive resources for the qualitative aspects of the work. The rhythmic nature of many medieval crafts would have created this supporting structure for sustained concentration. Brother William, a bookbinder at a monastery in Flanders, exemplifies this integration of physical rhythm and focused attention. His work, sewing quires to cords, shaping leather over wooden boards, tooling decorative patterns, involved repeated physical motions that, after years of practice, became nearly automatic. These rhythmic physical actions created a supporting structure within which his attention could focus on the qualitative aspects of the work. The tension of each stitch, the evenness of the leather, the precision of each tooled impression, the dietary patterns of medieval craftsmen, shaped by the agricultural possibilities of their regions, and the rhythms of the ecclesiastical calendar, created nutritional conditions that modern science increasingly recognizes as supportive of cognitive function and sustained attention. While medieval people had no understanding of neurochemistry, their traditional diets provided nutrients that contemporary research has linked to improved focus and mental clarity. Archaeological evidence, including bone chemistry analysis, coprolite studies, and food residue analysis, combined with documentary evidence from household accounts, monastic records, and guild regulations, provides detailed information about medieval diets. These sources reveal eating patterns markedly different from modern diets, with characteristics that modern nutritional science links to cognitive benefits. medieval diets were dominated by whole grains, wheat, rye, barley, and oats, prepared as bread, porridge, and ale. These complex carbohydrates provided sustained energy without the blood sugar spikes and crashes associated with refined carbohydrates. Modern research has found that stable blood glucose levels are essential for sustained cognitive performance, and the whole grain-based medieval diet would have provided this stability. Protein came from a variety of sources, depending on location and status. Fish, eggs, dairy, legumes, and meat in varying amounts. This dietary protein would have provided amino acids essential for neurotransmitter synthesis, including tryptophan for serotonin and tyrosine for dopamine and norepinephrine, chemicals essential for attention, mood, and cognitive function. The limited availability of sugar. Honey was the primary sweetener, and even that was relatively rare for most people, meant that medieval diets had a much lower glycemic load than modern diets. The cognitive benefits of reduced sugar consumption, including better attention and reduced inflammation, would have been a constant background benefit for medieval craftsmen. The medieval church calendar included numerous fast days, Wednesdays, Fridays, and the 40 days of Lent, plus vigils before major feasts, during which meat was forbidden and food intake was generally reduced. Modern research on fasting and cognitive function suggests these periodic restrictions may have had significant cognitive benefits. Studies on intermittent fasting have found that periods of reduced caloric intake can increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, a protein that supports cognitive function and neuroplasticity. The periodic fasting required by the medieval church calendar would have provided these benefits as a regular feature of life. Monastic communities, with their stricter observance of fast days and generally more austere diets, would have experienced these benefits most consistently. The extraordinary intellectual and artistic output of medieval monasteries, the great manuscripts, the theological works, the preserved classical texts, may owe something to the cognitive benefits of their relatively ascetic dietary practices. Medieval meal patterns, shaped by practical constraints and religious observance, created eating schedules that modern research suggests are optimal for cognitive performance. The typical pattern of 2 main meals, a morning meal and a main meal in the early afternoon, meant that heavy eating did not occur close to work periods. The monastic schedule typically placed the main meal around midday, followed by a period of rest or light activity before the afternoon work session. This timing allowed the post-meal dip in cognitive function, the postprandial slump, to occur during a rest period rather than impacting focused work. Guild craftsmen appear to have followed similar patterns, with the main meal typically consumed in the early afternoon and lighter eating in the evening. This meant that morning work occurred after a night of fasting, when the body had depleted glycogen stores and was operating in a metabolically efficient state that some modern research suggests supports cognitive function. Medieval people consumed ale, and in wine-producing regions, wine, in quantities that might seem excessive to modern sensibilities. However, medieval ale was typically low in alcohol, perhaps 2 to 3%, and served important nutritional and hydration functions. The fermentation process added B vitamins and made the ale safer to drink than potentially contaminated water. Moderate alcohol consumption, particularly at the levels typical of everyday medieval ale, may have had calming effects that supported focused work by reducing anxiety without impairing cognitive function. The regular but moderate consumption of low-alcohol ale throughout the medieval day may have created a mild, consistent calming effect that supported sustained attention, perhaps more than any practical factor. The spiritual beliefs of medieval craftsmen created psychological conditions that supported sustained, focused work. In a world where labor was understood as prayer, where craft was seen as participation in divine creation, and where the quality of work had eternal significance, craftsmen brought to their work a sense of meaning and purpose that modern research has identified as essential for sustained motivation and focus. The Benedictine motto, laborare est orare, to work is to pray, expressed a theology of work that shaped medieval attitudes toward craft. Manual labor was not merely necessary for survival or profit. It was a form of worship, a way of participating in the divine order of creation. This understanding imbued even mundane work with transcendent significance. Modern research on motivation and focus has emphasized the importance of meaning for sustained attention. When people understand their work as meaningful, as contributing to something larger than themselves, they can sustain concentration through difficulties that would defeat those motivated by external rewards alone. The medieval understanding of work as spiritual practice created precisely this sense of meaning. For monastic craftsmen, this connection was explicit and constantly reinforced. Every task, from the simplest copying work to the most elaborate illumination, was performed within a context of prayer and worship. The work itself was prayer. This understanding would have suffused the craftsman's attention with a quality of devotion that made sustained focus not just possible, but natural. Medieval craft was understood not merely as making things, but as participating in God's ongoing creative work. The craftsman was not creating ex nihilo, but was working with materials that God had created and bringing them to forms that expressed divine beauty and order. This understanding gave craft work a dignity and significance that supported devoted attention. The great works of medieval craft, the cathedrals, the illuminated manuscripts, the carved altarpieces, were understood as offerings to God. The quality of the work mattered not because it would bring fame or wealth. Artists rarely signed their works, but because offering inferior work to God was itself sinful. This theological understanding created motivation for quality that was entirely intrinsic, drawing on the deepest sources of human commitment. Master Gottfried, an architect overseeing construction of a cathedral in the Rhineland, would have understood his work within this theological framework. Every stone placed, every arch calculated, every detail designed was part of building a house for God. The extraordinary precision and beauty of medieval cathedral construction, achieved over generations without modern tools, reflected this understanding of craft as sacred obligation. Medieval craft culture emphasized the subordination of the individual craftsman to the tradition and standards of the guild. This humility, rather than limiting creativity, created psychological conditions that supported focused work. By reducing the ego involvement that modern research has identified as a significant impediment to concentrated attention. When the ego is strongly engaged, when we worry about how our work reflects on us, when we compare ourselves to others, when we seek recognition, part of our attention is constantly diverted from the work itself to self-evaluation. Medieval craft culture, with its emphasis on tradition and guild standards rather than individual expression, reduced this self-conscious dimension of work. The anonymous nature of most medieval craft, the the unsigned manuscripts, the unmarked carvings, the unattributed buildings, reflects this selfless attitude toward work. The craftsman's task was not self-expression, but participation in a tradition, serving purposes larger than individual recognition. This orientation toward service, rather than self-aggrandizement, supported a quality of absorbed attention, difficult to achieve when the ego is constantly engaged. Medieval spiritual tradition emphasized patience as a virtue, the ability to wait, to accept the time things take, to resist the urgency that comes from desire. This patience, cultivated as a spiritual discipline, would have directly supported the kind of sustained attention required for masterwork. Modern culture is characterized by impatience, the demand for immediate results, the frustration with anything that takes time, the constant search for faster methods. This impatience is profoundly destructive of focused attention, creating a state of constant urgency that prevents the settling into work that deep concentration requires. Medieval craftsmen, shaped by a spiritual tradition that valued patience, would have brought to their work a different temporal orientation. The manuscript that would take years to complete, the cathedral that would not be finished for generations. These projects were undertaken within a framework that accepted and even celebrated the time required for great work. The social organization of medieval craft, the guild system, the monastic community, the workshop hierarchy, created structures that protected and supported focused work in ways that our individualistic, entrepreneurial culture has largely abandoned. These social structures provided both the practical conditions for deep work and the collective support that sustained individual craftsmen over careers spanning decades. Medieval guilds served multiple functions that supported focused craft work. They regulated quality, preventing the degradation of standards that market competition might otherwise cause. They protected craftsmen from excessive economic pressure, setting prices that reflected the time required for quality work. They created communities of practice within which knowledge was transmitted and standards maintained. This collective framework reduced the economic and social pressures that might otherwise have pushed craftsmen toward faster, lower quality work. When prices were set by the guild rather than individual competition, and when quality was enforced by collective standards, craftsmen could focus on doing good work rather than maximizing output. Modern research on motivation has found that excessive external pressure often undermines both quality and creativity by inducing anxiety and encouraging shortcut taking. The guild system's reduction of competitive pressure created conditions where craftsmen could focus on the intrinsic rewards of good work rather than constantly worrying about economic survival. The medieval workshop, with its hierarchy of master, journeymen, and apprentices, created a social structure that supported both learning and focused work. The presence of multiple people at different skill levels created opportunities for teaching and learning that reinforced the standards and practices of the craft. For the master, the presence of apprentices and journeymen created an audience for whom excellence was constantly demonstrated. This social context would have reinforced his own commitment to quality and provided the satisfaction of transmitting knowledge to the next generation. For the apprentices and journeymen, the master's presence provided a model of skilled attention and a standard to work toward. Modern research on learning has emphasized the importance of communities of practice, groups of people engaged in shared activities within which learning occurs through participation and observation. The medieval workshop was precisely such a community, supporting both skill development and the maintenance of focused attention through social learning and mutual reinforcement. Monastic communities represented the most complete expression of social organization for focused work. Every aspect of monastic life, the architecture, the schedule, the rules, the common practice, was oriented toward creating conditions for spiritual work, including the work of reading, writing, and craft. Within the monastery, the individual's commitment to focused attention was supported by the collective practices of the community. The silence, the ordered schedule, the shared prayers that punctuated the day, all created a social environment that supported individual concentration. A monk struggling with distraction was surrounded by brothers engaged in focused practice, their example and presence helping sustain his own attention. Modern research on habits and self-control has emphasized the importance of environmental support for desired behaviors. The monastic environment, designed explicitly to support spiritual focus, created social conditions that made sustained attention the default rather than the exception. Within such an environment, maintaining focus required far less individual willpower than it does in our distraction-saturated modern world. The focused working practices that characterized the medieval era did not disappear overnight. Rather, they eroded gradually through a series of historical developments that each chipped away at different aspects of the attention-supporting ecosystem that medieval craftsmen had inhabited. The printing press, while enormously beneficial for the spread of knowledge, began the process of attention fragmentation that has accelerated ever since. The increased availability of texts created new demands on attention. More to read, more ideas competing for consideration, more information to process. The mechanical clock, especially as its use spread beyond monasteries and into secular life, created time pressure unknown to earlier craftsmen. When time could be precisely measured, it could be precisely valued and precisely allocated, creating the time scarcity mindset that now pervades modern life. The Industrial Revolution accelerated these changes. Factory work, with its externally imposed rhythms and fragmented tasks, destroyed the integrated craft work that had supported focused attention. The separation of thinking from making, managers who planned, workers who executed, eliminated the meaningful engagement that had made medieval work absorbing. The electronic media of the 20th century, radio, television, and now digital devices, created constant competition for attention, where medieval craftsmen faced perhaps an occasional visitor or message. Modern workers face hundreds of notifications, emails, and potential distractions every day. The result of these historical developments is the attention crisis that now characterizes modern life. Studies suggest that the average office worker is interrupted every few minutes. The ability to focus for extended periods has become so rare that deep work, as computer scientist Cal Newport has termed it, has become a competitive advantage rather than a normal expectation. The contrast with medieval focus is stark. Where a medieval scribe might work for hours on a single manuscript page, modern knowledge workers struggle to focus for minutes before checking email or social media. Where medieval craftsmen spent years developing attentional capacity through progressive training, modern education provides almost no systematic development of sustained attention. The costs of this attention crisis are becoming increasingly apparent. Despite our technological advantages, quality of craft has not improved proportionally. The the great medieval works, the cathedrals, the manuscripts, the finest craft objects, remain unsurpassed in many ways, their quality reflecting an investment of focused attention that few modern workers can match. While we cannot recreate the medieval world, the focus practices of medieval craftsmen offer valuable lessons for reclaiming attention in our distracted age. Environmental design. The medieval attention to workspace design, visual simplicity, acoustic control, consistent lighting, offers a model for creating modern spaces that support focus rather than undermining it. The open-plan offices that dominate contemporary work environments represent the opposite of medieval focus environments, maximizing distraction rather than minimizing it. Temporal structure. The rhythmic patterns of medieval work, focused periods alternating with rest and recovery, longer seasonal rhythms of activity and rest, align with biological patterns that modern schedules often ignore. Restructuring work to follow these natural rhythms could significantly improve both attention and well-being. Progressive training. The medieval apprenticeship model, with its gradual development of skill and attention over years, offers an alternative to modern education's emphasis on rapid information transfer. Developing attentional capacity, like developing any skill, requires progressive training, gradual increases in difficulty that build capacity over time. Meaningful work. The medieval understanding of craft as meaningful, as spiritual practice, as participation in something larger than the individual created motivation that sustained attention through challenges. Finding or creating meaning in modern work could provide similar support for sustained focus. Protective social structures. The medieval guild's protection of craftsmen from excessive market pressure created conditions where quality could take precedence over speed, creating modern equivalents, organizations and norms that value quality over mere productivity could help recreate conditions for deep work. Physical integration. The physical nature of medieval craft, engaging body and mind together, created states of absorbed attention that purely mental work rarely achieves. Finding ways to integrate physical engagement with cognitive work might help recreate some of these absorbing states. The craftsmen of medieval Europe, the scribes and illuminators, the builders and carvers, the goldsmiths and weavers, achieved levels of sustained focus that seem almost superhuman by contemporary standards. Their attention was not superior due to any single factor, but through the remarkable alignment of multiple elements. Environments designed for concentration, rhythms aligned with biology, progressive training that built attentional capacity over decades, work understood as meaningful social structures that protected focused time, and physical practices that supported cognitive function. The works they left behind, the Book of Kells and the Lindisfarne Gospels, the great cathedrals that still dominate European cities, the illuminated manuscripts and carved altarpieces and forged weapons, testify to what sustained attention can achieve. These works were not created by geniuses possessed of supernatural gifts, but by ordinary humans working within conditions that supported extraordinary focus. Their approach to work was not the result of advanced scientific understanding or deliberate optimization. Rather, it emerged organically from their way of life, their environmental conditions, and their cultural practices. Yet, modern attention science increasingly validates the effectiveness of these ancient patterns, suggesting that in our quest for better focus, we might look not only forward to new technologies, but also backward to wisdom embedded in traditional practices. Perhaps the most important lesson from medieval craft is what might be called the craftsman's paradox. Those who worried least about optimizing their productivity may have been the most productive in history. Medieval craftsmen did not have productivity apps or time management systems. They simply worked within conditions that supported natural concentration, and extraordinary work emerged. This stands in stark contrast to our modern approach, where attention is increasingly treated as a resource to be managed, optimized, and hacked. The evidence suggests that this anxious focus on optimizing attention may actually undermine the very concentration it attempts to improve. The medieval craftsmen remind us that the best attention comes not from treating focus as a problem to be solved, but from creating the conditions where concentrated work emerges naturally from the way we live. The people of medieval Europe likely experienced some of the best focused attention in human history, not because they knew more about cognition than we do, but because they worked in ways that naturally supported the attentional processes our brains evolved to utilize. By understanding their practices and the principles behind them, we can work to reclaim some of that lost capacity for focus and apply it within our modern context, not by becoming medieval craftsmen, but by recognizing the timeless human capacities their lifestyle inadvertently cultivated. As we navigate our modern attention crisis, the medieval craftsman offers us not just historical curiosity, but practical wisdom. The best attention comes not from struggling against distraction through force of will and technology, but from creating conditions where focused work naturally flourishes. In this, as in their legendary craftsmanship, the medieval masters have set a standard we would be wise to approach, if never fully to reach, in our hyperconnected, distraction-plagued modern world.